talking about Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling, who are really great examples of the kind of heel that you used to see a lot in the 80s and during the 90s, whether it be Ted DiBiase or Vince McMahon, but has kind of changed over the last couple of years.
Well, obviously there's the kind of current version of the Vince McMahon power, and that's, of course, Stephanie and Triple H, or at least the kind of version of Triple H that exists on Raw and the main roster. They still play those kind of power games, right? Because they're in charge, and certainly going back to the kind of late Attitude, early SmackDown era, playing those power games was just a huge part of Triple H's characters.
That's why we're here. Because Kurt Angle is an idiot.
One I think of is The Miz, who uses his fame. He uses it as a way to not appear in the arena, as a way to hold power in terms of booking over people. He uses what passes for power now in a way that Ted DiBiase used money.
That kind of social capital, that's what really counts now. It reflects the way our culture has changed. Another person I think is doing a great job currently, and this is my requisite MLW plug, is Selena De La Renta. She's, a top heel manager over there. She really does present herself as a manager to the stars, someone who can, take talent from Latin America and bring them to the US and make them rich and famous. So I think she's someone right now who really is kind of playing that psychological kind of executive level power game.
And power games were something that Enron executives used all the time. They got an analyst at Merrill Lynch fired for not giving them a positive rating, questioned pretty openly the ethics of the reporter from Fortune, Bethany McLean. Jeff Skilling really famously called an analyst an asshole for asking a question about why they couldn't produce a balance sheet during a conference call. And I think a lot of that is bullying that comes from being worried about being exposed. In the case of Ted DiBiase, it was that he wasn't as tough as he thought himself to be. The Enron executives, is that their company, and by extension themselves, especially in the case of Ken Lay, whose value was so tied up in the company, had been built up on a lie and then collapsed because somebody exposed the lie. I think they made everyone much more skeptical of how much money any given person had in the bank at a given time. People no longer believe you unless you're Bill Gates, which makes it much harder to create a character who can just buy off everybody. It makes much more sense to build a character that is privileged and has power, or is famous and has power because of that.
I mean, that's been one of the dominant narratives for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. Especially when it comes to, the current president.
You can get away with almost anything if you're the right amount of rich and the right amount of famous, because people are always willing to associate themselves with you, and they're always willing to associate themselves with your success.
It goes back to what he said to Billy Bush. I won't repeat the famous line, but his qualifier was when you're a star, or if you're a star. If you're someone with a face and a name and a personal brand, you can get away with whatever you want. In the way it used to be, that kind of cash money in the bank was the way to achieve that.
I think that's why you will see in the future more characters like EC3 than you will see someone doing the gimmick and having it work the way that Jinder Mahal does with the modern day Maharaja.
I mean, they took Ted DiBiase and then they kind of redid it with Alberto Del Rio, but with less teeth. And then they did it quickly again with Jinder Mahal with even less teeth than Del Rio had. So I think over time, you can kind of see that way that gimmick has degraded. And I think EC3 is a great example to point out as sort of an evolution in the right direction, a vector towards the future of that gimmick. He's really sort of the natural heel to talk about when we discuss Enron, because he's the kayfabe nephew of Dixie Carter. And how is Dixie Carter wealthy? Because her family owns a massive energy company. So EC3 is directly tied to energy industry corruption, and therefore Enron. We couldn't have put a more perfect bow on things.
Here among the poor, sad, despicable, oppressive, misinformed, must be hard for you to bite your tongue secure.